Welcome to Awaken Empower TV. I'm your host, Ethan Fox. Today I'm joined by Winston Shrout, who is an expert in the Maritime Admiralty law system as well as the legal system in general. Today we'll be speaking about how to remove your commercial or financial karma, and we also delve into other interesting topics such as extraterrestrial influences in the world and some other very fascinating metaphysical subjects. Winston will be doing a workshop at the ESETI Ranch this September 2015, something you definitely want to check out, and we'll be talking about that in this conversation. He'll provide you with links to sign up for the workshop as well, and also speak about some of his other programs that he has going on. So without any further delay, here's Winston Shrout. Hi, Winston. It's a pleasure to meet you and to have you on Awaken Empower TV. I'd really like to start because this is the first time I'm interviewing you, and so our viewers, I'm sure a lot of them are familiar with your work, but for those who aren't, I'd like to get a little feel for your life experience and what were you doing prior to the work that we're going to be discussing later on this interview in more detail. Did you always have an interest in the legal system or the financial system or these things that you're involved in now? What brought you down this journey to this work, and were there any childhood inclinations that might have suggested that you were going to do this?
Yes, in a roundabout way, you might say that. As a young person, I was actually raised in a religious household, and the consequence of that, I was, a student of Scripture. I was a student of some of the concepts there, which played very well into my present understanding and so forth. And so, as I grew up, as I grew into my teenage and so forth, I realized that, like so many, I felt like I was a stranger on this planet. And so I think many have had that feeling, that recognition. Certainly many people have spoken to that. And so I'm one of those. So eventually, as I continue through life, having the various experiences, married, having families, going to college, going into the military, and all those kind of things that people typically do, I was actually preparing for a major awakening, which for me occurred in 1989. And so at that point, there are certain things, certain traumatic experiences, I might add, that caused me to reflect and to have a major awakening, as it were. And certainly at that time, I was not cognizant of what would come in the future in regards to that awakening. But my life's experiences up to that point had prepared me for it. So eventually, over the time, certainly we all come into contact with society, certain situations, perhaps in the court, perhaps tax issues, and some of these various things, which I experienced, and they left me confused as to the cause of those kind of problems. So in 1998, I was actually able to retire from my normal occupation, which gave me a great deal of time to study into some of these matters. And so along about that period of time, I was in a study group, and we were studying law and courts and all those kinds of things from the perspective of what, basically people would call common law or statutory law and some of those kind of things. And then all of a sudden, one of the members in our group came and said, he said, I have some cassette tapes here of a conference that was held where they talked about something that they called commercial redemption. Now, that was a kind of a new term for us. And so we started to listen to these tapes, and we said, we think we have some of the answers that we have previously been seeking for, but could not be found within the law system that we had been studying. And as I found out, the more I studied into the concepts of commercial redemption, I saw that those concepts and principles were very much in line with what I had studied in the scriptures, in particular, the King James Version. And let me emphasize version, the King James Version of the Holy Bible. And so my learning in the arena of commercial redemption was greatly enhanced by my training in the scriptures. And so we had the opportunity. Well, back in those days, actually, there was very little information in regards to these concepts and principles. It was just starting to gain a little bit of speed. And so in the first instance, we had very little information to work with. And in consequence of that, many instances, I had to travel long distances to find people who understood those principles. I mean, we were driving out of Utah all the way up into Idaho or down into Southern California or wherever I had to go in order to obtain this knowledge. And then as time went on, more and more knowledge, more and more technology was developed. And so I fit very well into that system. And so I was doing study classes here and there, but along about 2004, we decided that we would put together an education program and do seminars to basically enlighten people about these concepts, because many of these things are kind of foreign, or as you mentioned, a bit on the fringe of the popular way of doing things, the way of looking at things. And so one of the things I first found out when addressing people was that I had to undo many of the concepts that they were working with so that they could understand and comprehend the principles that were being talked about in commercial redemption. So we started on this journey back in 2004, doing seminars various places across the United States. Eventually, we went into Canada and had a good effect there. We were asked to come to Australia, then present there. And so I've been in a lot of different places, Australia several times, New Zealand, Canada quite a bit, until the Canadian government finally got tired of it and asked me not to come back anymore or face prison time. So I don't go back to Canada any longer. However, we have the internet, and so I can't be stopped in that respect. And one of my favorite seminars that we did was actually in London, England. And I love that. Oh, I love that. We were just not too far away from the city of London. I think probably your audience understand that concept. And so we've had a good effect. And then in consequence of some other operations, actually I went into the international arena, in as much as I was, I can't say inducted, but I was given official positions and responsibilities, principally with the Office of International Treasury Control and also the Sukarno Trust. And so I started to assume more and more responsibility, not only from the education point of view, but also to help with the knowledge I had in some of the operations that were undertaken in order to correct the international financial matrix. And so I have worked in that arena as well. And so I have kind of a broad perspective, not just only of situations as they arise here in the United States, but also from perhaps a worldwide perspective. And so that gives me a little bit of edge. If I have questions, for instance, I always can call someone in very high positions who can explain to me the situation as it truly is. So that's kind of what we've done. We've done seminars, workshops. We have produced DVDs of the seminars that we have done for the most part, also with single topics. What I've done is create a single topic DVD to address particular subjects which people ask about, so forth. And then we have, in some instances, we've transcribed some of those seminars and so forth. And then also I've started writing books to explain some of these things. So we've had a very good impact across the country and across the globe. For instance, about a week ago, I was on a Skype conversation with some gentlemen in South Africa. And so they were interested in the technology. And so the conversation we had, basically, all I could do was explain the principles as they apply here, and then they would have to adapt that technology to their particular circumstance and law system there in South Africa. So I only speak English, I guess, which is unfortunate, or maybe I could reach into more places on the planet, but who knows? Maybe somebody will come along and be my translator. So that's kind of the experience I've had. And it's been a very, very good experience. I have met and been associated with just the highest level of people. I mean, I'm so very pleased with the associations I've made through my efforts. And so that's kind of a summation of what we've been doing for the last 10 years or so.
Now, you mentioned an awakening. Now, is that awakening the experience you had back in 1989 when you started exploring these legal avenues, or was it some kind of a spiritual awakening, because you did mention a Christian upbringing and so on?
Well, when I say an awakening, well, I'll tell you exactly what it was. And that was, we had lost a child in childbirth, and which is always a traumatic experience, especially for the mother. And in consequence of that, my wife had asked me to pray and inquire what was the cause of this. Distraught people and so forth have those kind of thoughts. So I did. I prayed, to find an answer. And I was kind of shocked by the response that I had gotten in answer to my prayer. But in essence, what the punchline was that that I had been requested on the other side, but I had a responsibility here, and so actually, rather than a rude awakening, it was more of a continuation of mission that I had here. And so being being a spiritual person naturally, that was certainly a continual or a continuation of my spiritual journey, of my awakening. So it was a major turning point in the respect that I knew that heaven was watching me and had certain expectations, although in 1989 I did not know at that time the extent of what was required. At this point in my life, I'm basically in what I would call phase 3 of my purpose or mission here, and I'm actually working into phase 4, which is yet to be unfolded to me, although I have a pretty good idea of what that might be. And so the future has some interesting things coming up, which I'm looking forward to.
And what are these phases, or can you share that?
Well, just developmental phases in anybody's life, not just myself, but I have easily recognizable phases that I have worked through at this particular time. Certainly since 1998, this has been a major phase. The things that I have done, not only as far as education and teaching, but some of the other operations that I have done have had a major impact. If you'd like me to, I'll tell you what one of those things was.
Sure. Yeah, please.
Well, it started in 2010. We had, I was associated with some others, and we were involved in attempting, with a great deal of difficulty, I might add, to fund humanitarian projects. In particular, the area of that I wanted to work in was funding of projects among the native people in the Southwest. And so that's where I was living at the time. So my interest was there, had quite a few contacts. And so anyway, one of our group said, listen, I think we can raise some of these funds. And so he went to Cambodia to speak with Dr. Ray C. Dam, who was the director, if you want to call it that, of the Office of International Treasury Control. Now, the Office of International Treasury Control is that organization which was set up to basically govern the what we call the collateral accounts, the gold that underwrites all the world's currencies. And so my friend went to that organization, and Dr. Dam agreed in principle to set us up a trading program to fund our projects. But he says, it's important for me to have a chance to see who else you're working with, so he would be satisfied that he was working with the right kind of people. And so, the consequence of that, myself and another gentleman, we went later on to Phnom Penh, Cambodia, to meet with the Office of International Treasury Control and Dr. Dam. And so, when we got there, Dr. Dam was out of country. And so we met with the cabinet and the chief of the cabinet. And the chief of the cabinet was an Australian. Well, Dr. Dam himself is Cambodian, but the chief of the cabinet is Australian, and he's a man known as Keith Scott. And Keith Scott is if there's anybody that knows what goes on the planet in regards to financing and so forth, Keith Scott is the person to ask, because he goes deep, and he is very well trusted, as I'll explain in a moment, by the Asian community, the ones that have the gold. So, the various people there were passing out business cards, for information and so forth. And I didn't have a business card. I don't do business. And so Keith asked me, he says, well, why don't you have a business card? And I said, I don't do business. He said, what do you do? And so I told him, I do commerce. Now, that kind of threw him back a little bit. He was trying to figure that comment out. And so in between that meeting and our next meeting, he had a chance to contact some of his friends across the planet. And when we got back to the next meeting, Keith told me, he says, when you came in here the other day, he said, I had no idea who you were. He said, but I contacted all my friends across the planet. He said, everybody knows you. I said, well, now you know me, don't you? So anyway, Keith and I became close friends from that time. And then in respect to some operations that were wanted to be addressed by the OITC, I was given an official appointment to operate as a representative of OITC in the United States. So I asked them basically, what is it you want me to do? They said, main thing is we want you to go over there and fix that foreclosure problem. And I said, gracious, that's a pretty big job. And they said, well, you're the man for it. Get over there and get busy. And I said, okay. And so anyway, I came back after that, and we went to work on that. As you know, here in the United States in 2008, the mortgage bubble popped, and we had all those problems with foreclosures and so forth. And that was very embarrassing. That was very embarrassing to Dr. Dam and the OITC, because they're the organization that underwrite all the mortgages that the banks are putting out. And their first comment to me was, the American people are not paying their bills. I said, oh, no, you got the wrong idea on that. Let me explain to you what's going on. So then I explained the criminal activities of the banks, how they were handling things, and so forth. And so they had one of those aha moments. They said, aha. So, Winston, get over there and get that fixed. And so when I came back, certainly we continued working on those things. And there was some ups and downs. At one point, we had arranged a major bank trade to produce the funds because we had enough connections that we were prepared to go and purchase all of the secondary mortgage paper. Now, if we could have taken all that away from the banks and went back to the homeowners with a new deal, a more favorable deal, then we would have accomplished what Dr. Dam had given to me to do. But as it turned out, our trade that we did with HSBC Hong Kong got stolen from us, as is natural with HSBC Hong Kong. Boy, what a bunch of crooks they are. But in any event, we weren't able to accomplish that particular thing, so I had to continue with my education program. And at this point here, I do believe that I do have the solutions to the mortgage problems, and so I'm starting to educate, from that point of view. And the upcoming seminar that we're going to do is going to be a continuation, and I will explain some of those principles at that time, because I believe that properly utilized, that technology will in fact resolve these problems with the banks and the foreclosures. But consequences arose. An attempt on the life of Dr. Dam was made. They tried to poison him. He recovered from that. He's still alive. I won't say where he's at, but he's still alive, still kicking, because he is, in fact, a key figure on world financing. And I won't go into all that. But in any event, in consequence of some of those things, Keith Scott continued on, and he was asked, and he was given the appointment with the Sukarno Trust as the settler for the Sukarno Trust with full power of attorney from the Amana, the people that own the gold. And so in consequence of that, in 2012, in the spring of 2012, Keith wanted to address some problems. And so I went to Jakarta to meet with him to see, what could be done about the problem he was trying to address. Now, here's the problem. Way back in 1933, 35 period of time, the Federal Reserve banks leased 2.4 million metric tons of gold to underwrite the Federal Reserve notes in the Federal Reserve system. And with that lease, there was a 4% fee. Now, this is not interest, a 4% fee annually to be paid for the use of that gold. The problem was they had never paid the 4%. So at that point, Keith, as the settler for the Sukarno Trust, wanted to do something about that. And so when I got there and he explained the situation to me, I said, well, this sounds like a real good place to institute a commercial lien against the Federal Reserve banks. And so he said, that's a good idea. Can you put that together? I said, yes, I can. As it turns out, I'm an expert in commercial liens. So anyway, I worked on that about 2 days, putting that all together, wherein we went against each separate of the 12 Federal Reserve banks as lien debtors. Now, what I asked him in that respect, I said, on the contract for the lease, how is that 4% to be paid? So he had a copy of the contract right there on his computer. So he looked and he said, it doesn't specify. I said, good. I said, gold was given, gold will be required. And so when we wrote the lien up, the true bill was written in gold. Now, for some reason, he wanted to start calculating from 1961. And I think it had to do had something to do with some of the operations of John F. Kennedy and President Sukarno, perhaps with some of those Green Hilton agreements and so forth. But anyway, he wanted to start calculating from 1961, which was 51 years total. So anyway, when I calculated it all up, the 4% annual fee added up to twice the amount of the original gold that was leased. Now, we knew the Federal Reserve banks didn't have any gold at all anyway. I mean, if people think there's any gold in Fort Knox, you know, you got a pipe dream going on, because there's no gold there. All the bars that they see and so forth, they're simply tungsten bars that are gold plated. There's no gold in the Fort Knox. But anyway, the key to it was this, and the real value of what we were doing was that the Federal Reserve banks, as privately owned central banks, were due to recharter 1 January 2013. But with that lien in place, they could not recharter. And in consequence of that, the privately owned Federal Reserve banks came under the control of the United States Treasury, which was exactly where we wanted them. So in any event, you know, aside from, you know, traffic tickets and IRS liens and all those kinds of things, I have been able to impact the international, because those liens that we did started a domino effect. And Keith further went on and did some other commercial liens against some of the other European and Asian central banks, which had in fact illegally been trading on the collateral accounts. So we started kind of a domino effect. It was kind of funny as we were working on that. Keith was in communication with some of his friends. One of them was a pretty high fella in the FBI, another friend who was pretty high up in the Pentagon. So he told them what we were doing. And their comment was, how soon can you get that done? Because they saw the value of what was happening, and perhaps that would have assisted them in some of the things that they were working on. So again, the same principles, the same technology that we use on what we would call our day-to-day efforts and so forth, was the same technology that was put in place in that international venue. So it's been a fun ride. And there's been other things also, which I don't need to go into, that we have done with the international, where I have been able to use the technology to assist the effort that's being made at present to correct the international financial matrix.
So it sounds like the current phase and the phase that you've been in for a little while is really, correct me if I'm wrong, focused on working with international governments and solving some of these problems. Is that
no, the present phase that I'm working in now is simply commercial redemption, whether on the local basis, on a national basis, international, or whatever. The next phase I think that I'm going into, although I don't have quite a clear picture of it, would probably deal more in the international. Mm-hmm. We'll see how that works out because of the official appointments that I have in regards to the OITC and also the Sukarno Trust. And so I kind of suspect that I'll have more things to do internationally in some of those things. Hopefully I can keep maintaining the phase 3 operation that I have, which is really the crux of the whole thing, is because when people become enlightened, then we have a major force that can move forward. And that's why here in the last couple of years, when I first started out with these solutions in commerce, my audience was basically what we would call the patriot community. And so I knew that was actually a pretty small community of people, even though, the information went out to a great deal more people than just the patriot community. And so at that point, I realized that what we would call the UFO ET community was very large, and they were already awake. And so I didn't have to unscrew their head to make some sense to them, because they were already awake. And so I attempted to move into that community with the information. I made contact with, for instance, Robert Potter. I made contact with James Gilliland and some of those because they were well established in that community. And so I started to make my association with them and to try to get the information and the interest out to that large community. And so then also in your world, where people are working on developing their spiritual side, their spiritual self, that's also a very large community. Now, what I perceive from the commercial point of view is what I call commercial karma. And that is, when people are trying to work on the spiritual elevation, so forth, it's very difficult if they have all of these problems in the third dimensional commercial world. And that's what I call commercial karma. And so I do have the formulas to relieve that commercial karma in the third dimension. And so I'm trying to move into all the audiences I can, because I believe that I have something of value in all of those communities. So, if you sit down and try to pray and meditate, and you got a third-party debt collector, banging on your door, or the sheriff shows up and throws you out of the house, it kind of interrupts. It kind of interrupts your frame of mind. And so I believe that through the technology that we have developed over the last 10, 15 years and so forth, that it's possible to settle those commercial accounts in such a way that we can remove the karma of debt from people, so they can ascend to whatever level that they can attain to. Now, I'm also a spiritual being, aside from being a foot soldier and slogging around down here in the muck. I do also sit on a galactic round table with Saint Germain and some other entities. And so in that round table, we figure out, what can be done to alleviate some of these problems, and so forth. And then they send me down here on the ground to put those things into effect, which I do. And so aside from the mundane things that we deal with, the solutions to a lot of these situations are planned for, and the solutions are developed in the ether, and then we come and effect them in this dimension. I'll give you one perfect example if you have time.
Sure, go ahead.
And that was when we had gone to London to do that seminar there. That was in the fall of 2009. And prior to going there, I had made a contact through a friend with a lady in England who, as it turns out, is the queen of the fairies in Ireland. And she's also a very powerful shaman. So when I went to London, I never had met her face to face, but after the seminar was over with, she agreed to come and visit so that we could make that acquaintance. And she did come. And so we had spent a day together, and I made that association. And with my Irish background, we were naturals because my ancestors had come from the same county that she had come from. So we had that natural connection anyway. You know how the Irish are. So anyway, later on, she told me that when she was scheduled to come to that meeting there in London, she lived about an hour away on public transportation. She said she was reluctant to come, but she said that Saint Germain himself came and drug her out of bed and said, "Get down there," because he wanted us to make that connection. So we did. Okay, now this plays into the story I'm fixing to tell about what we had done from the ether as it translated into in the physical world. And that was when we were there, we had a chance to do a little bit of touring around. We went to the Maritime Museum, and then up on the hill there's that observatory and so forth, and that's where they have the Greenwich timeline, the prime meridian. And so it's in the ground. There's a brass plate there with that timeline, down through it. So I looked down that timeline, and that line ran straight into the city of London. And I said, that's a problem, because the city of London has control of the start and stop of commerce. And I knew that prime meridian was a artificial line. Okay, so the start and stop of commerce is artificial. Okay, so I thought about it for a while, and then eventually, once I made a better association with this lady, I'll just call her Catherine. So once I made a better association with Catherine, and then come to find out just how powerful she was as a shaman, then I made a suggestion to her along about 2011, as I recall, and I asked her, I said, do you have the ability to move the prime meridian over to the Rose Line? Now, the Rose Line is quite famous from the Da Vinci Code movie and all that kind of stuff, but it's a natural ley line. It's called the Dragon Rose Line, and it's an ancient ley line, a natural ley line on the planet. Now, I think probably people in your audience understand that. So anyway, she said, yes, I can. I said, we'll do it then. So she said, okay. She says, usually when I do something on the ether, she said it takes about 3 days to materialize in the physical world. She says, I'll go to work on it right now. And so anyway, with the time difference between the West Coast, where I was at, and in England, there's quite a time difference there. And so when I got up the next morning and opened up my Skype, she was hot to talk to me. She said, So I said, oh, what's all the excitement about? She said, if I hadn't been watching the clock, she said, I would not have seen it. But she said from about 8 o'clock this morning until 3 in the afternoon, time stood still. She said that's how long it took for that line to move over to the Rose Line. And then she took and anchored it down so it couldn't be moved back. Now, the result of that, I said, well, I guess there's probably a whole lot of excitement in the city of London now. She said, well, I'm sure there is. I said, can you go look and see? And she said, no. She said, if I open that up, she said, they will attack me. So what she did, she had a friend who was a psychic to do a remote view. And she looked inside there and said, boy, they're running around like a bunch of rats trying to figure out what happened. And she said, not only there, but she said, in the Vatican, it's the same thing. So in essence, what we had done was taken control of the start and stop of commerce and put it back into the real world, taking it out of the artificial and put it back there. And then she told me, she said, Saint Germain has another concern that he wants worked at. And I said, what's that? And she said, well, there's a buoy out in the Thames River that he wants something done with. And I said, well, sink it. She said, okay, I will. Now that took her a little bit more time. She said it was very difficult because she actually had to move the buoy out into the ocean where it was deep enough where she could sink it where it would not have the effect. And then there was one other thing of concern to me, which I won't go into at this time. But before I asked her to operate on this particular thing, I said, you better check with St. Germain about this before we attempt it. And she checked with him, and he said, yeah, that can be done, but not now. And so there's some other things that we have to work on here sometime in the future from that perspective. And so I've had a very good association with Catherine. She's very able, very willing. So we've done some other things, and we will yet do some other things, which will originate, from the ether, and then will be translated into the physical world. So, aside from traffic tickets and mortgages and commercial liens and all that kind of thing, I also work from the perspective of from the spiritual realm, if I can use that word. So that's that story.
I know you're doing a workshop at ECETI soon, right?
Correct. Yes.
Yeah. So in that workshop, you're covering a lot of these things in more in depth, I assume, other than the
Yes. That particular seminar is titled "Removing Commercial Karma." And so I'm reaching out into what we would call the spiritual community, those who are working on uplifting, or however people style it. I mean, they used to say ascension, but now that's kind of come to be a unpopular word. And so there's other words for it, as you well know.
Empowering, maybe, yeah.
Empowering, there you go. That's a good term for it. And so knowing that some of these commercial problems associated with debt have a certain anchor, and so people are straining against that anchor, trying to make these empowerments and so forth. And I believe that if we can remove those commercial karmas in that respect, that they can move forward much faster. And so that's what my goal is with this particular seminar. And there'll be some technology which will be opened up, which can be used to do that exact thing. So that's the purpose of this particular seminar at ECETI. It's not going to be about UFOs and ETs and all that kind of thing. Although I did participate in James's workshop on the 4th of July weekend, which was more or less a round table. We had myself, we had Randy Kramer, the Captain K, the Mars guy, Michael Elysian, and I forgot the lady's name, but she is famous in the paranormal and the meditation world. There were quite a few healers that spoke, and Alexandra Metters, she spoke at that particular one. So we had a pretty good cast. The thing I appreciate about James is how well-rounded he is. It's not just about spaceships and ETs. James, being a very spiritual man himself, is in fact very concerned with spiritual matters. And so when he does things, generally it has to do with a rounded program. And so when we did that thing on the 4th of July weekend, that was the purpose of that. Now, this particular seminar is directed toward that one goal, which is the removal of commercial karma. So that's what that's going to be about. And then if the people want to go out in the field and watch the ships fly over and all that kind of stuff, they can. They can have a good time doing that. I myself go to bed early, so I don't like to stay up too late for that. And I tell people, look, I'm going to bed. If a ship lands and somebody gets out and asks for me by name, come wake me up. But other than that, let me sleep. I've had a lot of experience with that kind of thing over the years. Where I used to live out in the desert, there was something in the sky every night. So that's old hat to me. And then for about the last 14 years, I've had a close association and worked with a man who is not a human. He's actually a Pleiadian. He's been here on this earth through, I think, 13 incarnations. He's here at the direction of his Pleiadian group, whoever they are. And at this present time, I estimate his age to be about 120 years old. And so I made his association about 14 years ago, and we've worked on various things and are yet to work on some things here soon. And so I have those kind of experiences already. And so, you know, I mean, like I say, I kind of have a well-rounded experience on this planet. You know, I mean, I had all those things in my younger years, you know, like people typically do. Then I moved into other things and moved into this education program. And, you know, I have been involved with association with ETs, in particular this Pleiadian, so forth. So I've had a fairly well-rounded experience so far. So that's kind of where I'm at.
So the Pleiadian is a physical human being that has Pleiadian genetics, or what?
No, his parents are both Pleiadians. He was not born of humans. As a matter of fact, I asked him one time, is your internal anatomy the same as mine? He said, no. I said, will you explain the difference? He said, no, I won't tell you that either. But it's kind of funny. One time he came under attack. Some of the Black Ops people attacked him electronically. He went to the hospital. And, of course, they hooked him up. They thought it was a heart attack. It wasn't a heart attack. But anyway, it was another kind of attack. But anyway, so they hooked him up with all their, you know, monitoring devices and so forth. But here's what happens is when he goes to sleep, his heart stops. He had zero blood pressure while he's asleep. And so when he went to sleep, all the buzzers went off. So everybody runs in there, you know, with their paddles, electronic stuff, you know, and trying to get him back and all that kind of stuff. And he woke up all of a sudden and said, what are you crazy people doing? You know, he started slapping them away and all that kind of thing. But I have seen him do miraculous healings. That's not the first time that he has been tried to be killed. I mean, one time he got shot in the back 3 times. I know on a certain occasion they tried to poison him. You know, they tried the old trick with the pinprick, you know, introducing poison, you know, and stuff into him. He just laughs it off. He's able to recover from those things. He does have a remarkable ability to heal. And so, no, he's not a human. No, he's not a human. He's actually a full-blooded Pleiadian, born of Pleiadian parents. And I asked him, do you have any other siblings from your parents on the planet? He said, yes. And I said, who are they? He said, well, actually, you've met a couple of them from time to time. You just didn't know it. And then on another occasion, we were sitting in a restaurant talking about various things. And I asked him, are there more like you on the planet? Oh, he said, yeah, there's lots of us here. I said, really? I said, are there any in this restaurant? So he kind of put his head up, looked around the restaurant. Yeah, he said, there's 3 more in here. I said, will you point them out to me? He said, no. He said, what they're doing is their private business. He said, it's none of your business. But it put me to wondering, you know, I know what he works at and so forth. So I was kind of wondering, you know, what programs, different things that they might be working on. And I don't know, but I have to suspect, you know, that they're here for a good reason and working on various things. And so, and we have other examples of this also. I mean, if you go back into the late 50s, early 60s, we had the visit of Valiant Thor. Mm-hmm. He's still here, by the way. He hadn't left. He parked his craft down there on the shore of Lake Mead. So he's still here. And how many other Venusians are here, I have no idea. But we got lots of folks. We got lots of folks here who are here to help us, mankind, to move to the place that we need to be so that we can keep up with the pace that the planet Earth is making. Because if we can't keep up, we won't be here. So we have these helpers. We have those here who are assisting us in these things. And again, my job, my contract, the reason why I was brought to this planet has to do with the things that I'm working on with commercial redemption and some of these other programs that I have assisted in. As you understand, the Pleiadian constellation is a huge place, and there's many worlds there. And so which particular place he came from, he's never told me, or where some of these other helpers have come from, in the Pleiades, I don't know. But it's obviously apparent to me that there are many of them here. And I believe that there's quite a few Venusians here and people from inside of our solar system who have come on the planet during this time to assist us to get to the place where we need to be. Because after everything is said and done, we're all brothers and sisters and cousins and aunts and uncles. Hey, we're all family. Whether it's Pleiadians or Andromedan or Syrian or wherever we came from. And so we're all trying to unite in a joint effort to accomplish what needs to be done. And I'm playing my small part to the best of my ability, as well as others like yourself. And so as we present these things to people who are not yet aware and awake, then that's our job. And I'm sure you're doing your job successfully. I'm trying my very best to do my job. And we have many, many others who have been brought here to do this job. And so we're here to assist, to be of service to others. And so that's what we do in whatever calling, that we're best suited for. So I'm kind of suited for this other thing that I do because I'm just hard-headed enough to go out there and, tackle the planet, the commercial world and so forth. And then I do have spiritual leanings, and then I try to take those spiritual things and put them into effect in the physical world so that we can move along. We can't stay where we were. We just can't do that. And I have seen great progress just in the 10 years, that I've been lecturing and stuff. I have seen great progress. Certainly, if people understand what we call the 100th monkey theory, we have far exceeded that percentage which is necessary to put these concepts into the collective consciousness. And so it's much easier at this point because of the efforts over the years to infuse these principles and concepts into the collective consciousness. So in essence, people only have to reach up and grasp a hold of those concepts because they are available like they have never been before. Talking to James Gilliland a few months back, he said that he had noticed, because he can see these things, he said that he had noticed that the electronic grid that had been used for mind control on the planet was gone. Now, so if that mind control grid has been removed, then it's much easier for people to come out of that mind control. But it takes effort. It takes effort. People have to have, desire. They have to want to come out of that circumstance. But when they get that spark, or when they hear that word, or something inside them says, "Hey, wake up," then at this point in history, it's much easier for them to do that. And so people like yourself and me and all these others who are laboring to awaken people, then it's much easier now than it was a few years back. I think you know that. I think you see it yourself. Yeah. So that's kind of what we're working at.
If you can give our audience a little bit of an understanding of what is the difference, or what's maritime admiralty law compared to common law and statutory law, like what can you define those three a little bit as briefly as possible?
Sure. It has to do with the concepts that are best demonstrated in the Holy Bible. You have to understand the difference between the Old Testament law and the New Testament law because there was a major shift. Now, if you study those concepts as it's presented, particularly in the book of Hebrews, in the New Testament, you'll see it. But our present system has been fashioned after that system, in as much as our common law required an execution of law, much like the Levitical law. And that was, in order to fulfill a contract, there had to be an execution. In our commerce, in our common law, that required payment, because the maxim is that a contract I mean, a contract does not exist where it's made. It exists where it's paid. Okay. So our common law concepts required an execution in that respect, that they had to be paid. All right. Now, when you start to talk about the change that occurred in 1933, now this is a key date. I mean, it would take me, I could take about 3 hours to give the history of how that came about. But let's just say that in 1933, we had a change in our system, which was much comparable to the change that occurred with the execution of John the Baptist, and then consequently the execution of the surety, the entity we know as Jesus. Now, whether people take the Bible literally, figuratively, or whatever, it's of no consequence to me. I'm talking about the principles that were demonstrated, after which we have fashioned our present commercial system, you see. So in 1933, things changed, because what they did was they, now this is a worldwide thing. This is not just the United States. This dates back to 1928 with what was called the Plan of the Experts. And people can go and study that, or sometime maybe I could talk about it. Well, I have talked about it various times. But in any event, it was agreed by all the nations and all the royal families that they would gather up all the gold bullion, and they would put it into trust, so that all the nations, all the countries would have equal access to the use of it as a surety to underwrite their currencies. Now, this was the purpose of the OITC eventually, which was formulated in 1995 due to the consequences of misuse by the former committee that should have done that thing. But anyway, when you get into 1933 with the removal of substance from commerce, then we moved into the area of negotiable instruments. Now, negotiable instruments have been in use ever since the days of the Knights Templars. So this is not a new concept, but in order to facilitate the change in the monetary system and so forth, then they had to get away from substance, such as gold, silver, for use in commerce, and move into negotiable instruments. Now, this, when people first hear about this, their first reaction is they get angry. At first, I was angry until I started to consider it from this perspective. And that is, in 1933, I don't know how many people were on the planet, let's say 2 billion or something like that. And in our present circumstance, we have, by some estimates, 7 or 8 billion people on the planet. And having spoken to various ones, we have drawn the conclusion that all of those who have been on the planet at various incarnations have come back, along with the addition of a whole bunch of others who have come to assist in the transition of mankind on this planet as Mother Earth moves into a new dimension. Okay. But with the difference between the population in 1933 and the population in 2015 is very significant, because simply there was not enough gold and silver to accomplish commerce with that many people. It was very cumbersome to try to negotiate contracts and so forth using gold and silver. So to me, in my understanding now, the events that happened in 1933 were important in order to accommodate our circumstances as we find them now. So anyway, in essence, what happened was a system was developed. And in consequence of that, I mean, there's a lot more history I could go into to really explain it. But what was necessary was to create a system using negotiable instruments for either discharge of debt or set off of debt. Now, if you look at negotiable instruments, there's only two kinds. There's promissory notes, and there are bills of exchange, or what we would call drafts. And there's a world of difference between those two things. Discharge and set off are two completely different concepts. For instance, discharge of debt does not remove the debt, it simply puts it off into the future. However, a draft or a bill of exchange is to reduce a debt to zero. Now, that's where we're trying to get to, is that zero is such an important concept. People kind of look at me funny, when I say these kind of things. As a matter of fact, I was been probably about a year or so ago, I had done an interview with Alfred Weber. Alfred, the attorney. And so we got into a conversation. So I played a little game with him. It was kind of a trick. So I asked Alfred, I said, count to 10. So he started out 1, 2, 3. I said, stop. I said, start again. He said, okay. He said, 1, 2, 3. I said, stop. I said, why did you start with 1? He said, that's the way I was trained. I said, why did you not start with 0? See, 0 is the starting point for all mathematics. And I have, like I have said, 0 and infinity are the same value. Now, when we get into our present system, we had to change the accounting system to accommodate the negotiable instruments. Prior to 1933, accounting was more in tune with warehousing. And that is, where's the gold at today? There's a ton of gold over here, there's a ton of gold over there. So that's how we did our accounting with the former system. Now, when we get into our new system that involves itself with negotiable instruments and fiat currencies, then the system of accounting changed to what's known as double entry bookkeeping. And that double entry bookkeeping is regulated by what we call the GAAP rules, which is generally accepted accounting principles. And the key to arriving at fairness and equity is to arrive at a zero balance on the accounting. So with the use of promissory notes, you can never arrive at 0, but with the use of bills of exchange, you can arrive at 0, which demonstrates equity and fairness to all parties. And so the effort that we've made with some of the technology that we have developed is to show the technology of how to reduce the accounts to 0. Now that constitutes a closed account. For instance, in banking, most people operate with open accounts, you see. To demonstrate fairness and so forth, you would have to operate with a closed account. I'm going to stick my neck out here and say something, because everything in the public is prepaid. Now, this is one of the provisions of House Joint Resolution 192 of 1933. One of those provisions simply stated that it's impossible to pay a debt with a debt. Okay, you can't pay a debt with a debt. What can you do with a debt, such as a debt instrument like a Federal Reserve note or a British pound or a Indian rupee? The only thing you can do with those instruments is that you can discharge. Okay, now that does not reduce the accounting to 0. And so there has to be other technology developed to demonstrate that. And so as long as we are dealing in discharge of debt, then we're still carrying around that backpack of karma with us, because the debt doesn't go away. It is still there. And in many respects, it's a huge burden on people as they're trying to, uplift and do those kind of things. So the valuable technology that we have developed deals with settlement and closure. And so we do have that technology. It's usually in the form of what we call acceptance for value technology. We use that technology for a very long time with a great deal of pushback, I will add, from the government and from the IRS. But we just about got those folks handled now, so we should have a better time of it. So the real goal that people should be looking toward would be to reduce the accounts to zero, which demonstrates true equity. In other words, all parties have been treated fairly. Let me make this comment, and that is, to have a comprehension or understanding of these principles, it has to be done from a metaphysical point of view. Now, that's the first thing I discovered, when I started studying these things, was the metaphysical nature of what's being talked about. For instance, I think Einstein and other people, have made the comment that you can't solve a problem at the level that caused the problem. And so here we are in the third density or the third dimension or whatever you want to call it, the physical world, and we have these difficulties and problems, but they cannot be resolved at this level. We must go metaphysical. So when I do lectures and so forth, I'm always teaching from at least a fourth dimensional level. I'm very capable of doing that. And so, for instance, people will say, well, okay, I went to the seminar and I learned this. And then they go back and review the DVDs of the seminar. They say, wow, I learned something new. They go back the third time, the fourth time. And what it is they're going metaphysical. And they're starting to look at that circumstance that they heard the first time from a different viewpoint. And so, like I say, when I teach and when I lecture and so forth, I'm metaphysical. I'm teaching from another dimension into the third dimension. And as people start to comprehend, then they go metaphysical. They understand things from a different level and so forth. And that's why they keep learning and learning and learning each time they review the material. So that's how I've done it. And it's had a very good effect. Very good effect, because you can't just keep mucking around in the mud and expect to get clean. You got to get out, get some fresh water and take a bath. And so it's the same thing with what we're doing, in our court systems, in our taxing systems, in our banks, in all the things we're doing. These problems relate to the physical world. And so the solution to that is an understanding of these things from a higher dimension, and we are all capable of doing that. It's just some people are a little bit slower on the uptake than others. And so people like yourself and others who are encouraging people to uplift, as you use the word, and get to a higher level of understanding, that's what's necessary. And you cannot progress in your understanding of commercial redemption unless you do. And so we encourage that. And and some have been very successful at it. I mean, I know some really, really strong people that have moved into there. The guys that I associate with, for instance, it's kind of funny. One time, me and one of my, I would say co-equals, if I can use that word. Anyway, a man who was certainly on the level of understanding that I was. And he's a very spiritual man too, Anyway, we were having a business meeting with our business with Solutions in Commerce. And as the various ones were gathering, for this business meeting, I was talking to my friend. And we were carrying on a conversation that was pretty high. And the other people that came in and overheard what we were saying, they were sitting there with their mouth hung open. They were thinking, what in it? So again, what we try to do as educators, at the very least, is to encourage people and provide the vehicle so that they can move up in their understanding and so forth. Now, I'll give you another. It was kind of funny to me. This is a real good story. And that was early on, maybe about 2002 or 3. One particular gentleman was trying to gather up a group that could be taught in these concepts. And so we were having a meeting of select individuals that he had selected to be at this meeting, this organizational type meeting. And so he was trying to explain some of these concepts, you know, using the whiteboard to diagram different things and so forth. And I kind of looked around the room and I realized they weren't getting it. So I asked him, I said, how about I give it a try? He said, okay, they're here, have at it. So at that point, I took the floor and I started to describe, because most of the people there had a Christian background. As a matter of fact, there's actually one lay minister there, another gentleman whose grandparents were career missionaries in Central America. His parents were career missionaries. He was raised to follow in their footsteps to be a missionary. He was highly intelligent, and he had memorized the whole Bible from start to finish. If you quoted a scripture to him, he could take right up there and quote to the end of the Bible if you wanted him to. That's how talented he was. So anyway, this group were certainly, from that background. And so I was using those King James examples to try to make the comparison to the commercial redemption. So that's what I was trying to do. And so I had eventually moved into 2 Corinthians 15, which basically says, else what shall they do which are baptized for the dead, if the dead rise not at all? Why are they baptized for the dead? See, that was Paul. And so I quoted that scripture, and then all of a sudden I heard dead silence. I looked around the room, and everybody was like zombies. I mean, a couple of guys, their chin had hit their chest. I think, what in the world went on here? What happened? You know? And so after that was over with, when they finally came out of their stupor, I stopped. And then one of my friends who was there, who, fairly psychic, he said, let me tell you what happened. He said, I was watching you. He said, for about 20 minutes before you started to speak, he said there was a white beam of light that was coming directly into your crown chakra. And he said it continued with you for about 10 minutes as you were speaking. And so in essence, what I was doing, I was simply transmitting light to that group. Now, one of the fellow who was the career missionary, background, oh, wow, he was so affected. He was so affected. He was in tears. And he told me, he says, what you have said today has changed my life. And I'm thinking, what did I do? I didn't do anything but quote a few scriptures and use a few examples. But apparently that light had really touched him internally, and it had caused him to reflect upon his previous training to the extent that he knew that he needed to make some changes in his outlook. And so again, when we get involved in teaching and training and bringing some of these concepts and principles and so forth, without light, without the dissemination of light to the attendees, it would come short of what it is we're trying to accomplish. So again, for the listeners and those who are investigating some of these commercial redemption processes and so forth, it's ever so important to approach these things from a metaphysical point of view to get the full impact of what's available from the technology. So I hope maybe that'll help.
Yeah, so basically you're working on many different levels at the same time when you teach,
yes,
right? Yeah.
Correct.
So you're imparting the knowledge, which we're sharing some of that here, but you're also raising consciousness in a sense, or imparting some kind of vibrational information that is also changing the individual's level of awareness. So, I mean, essentially that's what's taking place, sounds like.
Yes. What I have found, at least in the beginning, is that ever so many people, because of their education, their background, perhaps their religious training, and these various things, they have fallen victim to mind control. Now, when I went to university, for whatever reason, my field of study was psychology. And in essence, what they trained us to do was to utilize mind control techniques, which I did learn, which I don't use, but I can identify it when I see it. And I do know the vast number of people, certainly who have been through the education systems and so forth, are under severe mind control. But what I have found is that if I can present just one thing that would cause these people to have a different thought than they previously had, then I put a crack in that mind control, and which can be expanded upon, you see. And so one of the real benefits of what I've done over the years is simply to tear down the mind control that people had previously been under by, at the very least, introducing just one new thought, just one new, and hopefully a whole bunch of new thoughts. But I realized that if I could just, rock the boat a little bit and cause people to think and reflect, that they could move away from at least, some measures of that mind control. And then, of course, then it's up to them to expand upon it. So that's been one of the real benefits of what I've been doing for the last number of years.
Why is it that the OITC is considered in more of a mainstream consciousness, or even by the Federal Reserve and the other organizations, as being a fraudulent organization? Why do they deny any association with it?
For obvious reasons.
Well, obviously for obvious reasons. So is that why that's the information that's out there in the public?
Yeah, most of that's disinformation, and for a reason. If the OITC was a fraudulent organization, why did they find the necessity of trying to assassinate Ray Dam? So if it was just a phony organization, there's no reason to kill Ray Dam. But they did try. And so that right there shows you that somebody, at least on the planet, does not think that OITC is a fraudulent organization.
So you personally feel pretty confident from your interaction with them that they are a legitimate organization, and also, have you actually seen the funds that would be used to repair the mortgage issue?
Well, in regards to the United States, as mentioned, the commission that was given to me by Ray Dam was basically go back to the United States and see if you can get that problem fixed. Now, we were already working from the educational point of view to help people deal with some of those problems. But immediately upon coming back to the United States, I started contacting people who I was associated with, who understood high finances and how to do trading and all those kind of things. So we had originally been involved with a huge foundation in Germany. I won't name some of these institutions. I'll just say that they had requested some international bills of exchange to use as security to go into some trading programs, which we agreed to supply. And so I am authorized by the OITC to create such instruments. So I did. And then at the last moment, that institution backed out of it, did not want to get into the trade, and I think I know why. But once you understand who the parties are in that institution, it makes good sense. But in any event, in that high level groups, there's not much that everybody doesn't know about. And so when we had gotten that far, there was a gentleman in Asia who, although he was not a member of the White Dragon Society, he was closely associated with them in more or less an ambassadorial type position. And so he found out about it. He approached us. He said, listen, he said, I think that I can make those things work. And he said, I think that I can get those things into a trade. Now, let me express the reason why we were doing that. It had to do with the mortgages. And that was one of our group who's been very influential in this country, had great connections. And what he did was he went to all these secondary mortgage holders. Now, he had enough influence that he could go into Treasury and so forth and trace all that paper that had been sold by the banks. Of course, it was fraudulent, and then because again, the banks were predatory, and aside from preying upon the American people, they were also preying upon the international community by selling them bad debt, and so they convinced them to buy it. Then in 2008, the mortgage system went upside down, and so all these people who had purchased the secondary mortgage paper were saying, "Uh-oh, we just lost our money." So anyway, the gentleman that worked with us, he was able to get a list of the various parties who had purchased the secondary mortgage paper, many of whom were private individuals, and some governments and some other institutions and so forth. And so he basically approached those institutions with, what will you sell us your paper for? And most of them would sell us their secondary mortgage paper for anywhere from 25 cents on the dollar to maybe 35 cents, just so they could recoup something, because they felt like they were in danger of losing it all. And so then the purpose of us wanting to get this trade platform going was to create the funds to purchase all the secondary mortgage paper. Now, when we got that paper in our control, the foreclosures stop. Then we go back to the homeowners with a new deal. And our new deal was, look, let's recontract on this mortgage, and the contract will be for whatever's remaining on your contract at no interest. So we were going to give them a deal you couldn't beat. And so that was the reason why. I mean, we have no reason, I have no reason to get involved in some kind of crazy trading program. But in any event, this is a gentleman who, as I mentioned, was involved at some level with the White Dragon Society. He went to work, and he actually did get those bills of exchange into a trade program. Now, the problem we had was that trade went through HSBC Hong Kong. And I got to tell you, if anybody's listening, that's the most crooked bunch of people on the planet. I mean, they really are crooks. Because as I mentioned, Ray Dam had intended to set up a trading platform for our original humanitarian programs that we came to him with. And he literally went to HSBC Hong Kong and wanted to use $500 million in an account that he was signatory on to set up that trading platform for us. And HSBC Hong Kong basically told him, take a hike. And they wouldn't do it, even though it was his account. And so again, one of the problems that Ray had was he had no way to foresee issues, for instance, at the point of a gun. In other words, he did not have Interpol behind him. He did not have anybody who could come in force. So that was one of the difficulties that he suffered with, through his whole tenure, even to this day. But in any event, this trade went through HSBC Hong Kong. As a result of that, our portion of it should have been somewhere around 150 trillion. And we traced it. We were able to trace, some of the trade money, and about, I think it was 76 trillion actually went to the United Nations. And we were able to track that. So then based upon what the UN got their cut for, then our cut should have been somewhere around 150 trillion, which would certainly have bought up all that secondary mortgage paper. And that was the design that we had to do that. Well, after that, there's a lot more to the story. And I don't really want to get into that story too much, but just to say that since our effort to accumulate the funds to buy up the secondary mortgage paper failed, then I simply went back to education. And that was explaining to people how they can fight the mortgages, explaining to them what it's all about, promissory notes, and all those kind of things. And so, in any event, we have hopefully educated people. And at this point in our history, here in 2015, I believe that I have the final solution to this mortgage fraud. There's a process, that we've developed which would accommodate that problem and put people into a very secure position with their mortgages. Now, we did talk about this. I presented it for the first time in the seminar we had last June, and I'll also be showing that process at our next seminar, which will be held at the ECETI Ranch in Washington State on the 4th, 5th, and 6th of September. From that, we will produce a DVD that people, if you can't come to the seminar, then we'll produce a DVD of the seminar so you have that technology available to you. So again, with my commission or my responsibility from Dr. Dam and the OITC, I'm still working at it. I haven't given up yet. And so if we can't do it one way, by golly, we'll do it another.
So what are some of the domino effects or repercussions of the commercial lien that you placed on the Federal Reserve? What has maybe happened materially, and what can we expect down the line?
Well, I think a lot of good things have come from it. I asked that very question to Keith. I said, what effects have you seen internationally as a result of that first effort with those liens against the Federal Reserve banks? And without going into detail, he assured me that there had been serious international repercussions which assisted. You remember, as I mentioned, his friends from the FBI and the Pentagon had asked him, and their position was, how soon can you get that done? Which meant that what we were doing would assist some effort that was being made at those levels to correct some of the problems and so forth. And so to actually put my finger on something that actually happened as a result of that, I cannot. But in any event, all indications are that it put a ripple in the financial matrix across the planet. At the very least, these crooked banks know that we can come and get them. And so as a result of that, certainly it facilitated in great measure the effort that was made, that has been made for the last couple of years of what's called the revaluation of the currencies. Now, I could go into that a little bit more, perhaps, if you're interested in it. But in any event, it opens that up so that it would have, hopefully, the effect. And then probably the main thing on the planet that has assisted in the correction of our international financial matrix are the what's called the Basel agreements. Now, the Swiss, for whatever reason, have long been considered kind of the policemen of the international banking and international financing. And so to facilitate those efforts, then they came up with what's known as the Basel agreements. And in particular, the one that's very useful is Basel III phase. They're already into Basel V, by the way. But in any event, Basel III, one of the key elements of that was transparency. And so, in essence, if the auditors go into a bank and they audit their books, and they find that the bank is claiming funds that were created by illegal trading on the collateral accounts and so forth, they can simply wipe those accounts out. As a matter of fact, one of my fellows that I had worked with on that original trading thing that we tried to do has been very instrumental in the RV process. And he told me, he said, I have full authority to go into a bank and audit their books. And he said, when I go in, I take Interpol with me. And he says, yeah, we do have power to arrest if the bankers are proven to be corrupt. So thanks to Basel III, with the requirement that we would have transparency, the banks can't hide money anymore. They can't claim money that was illegally obtained. And so, like I say, a lot of the banks are claiming, let's say, they say, well, we have 10 trillion in assets. Oh, really? Let's go look at that money to see where it came from. And if they find that the auditors find that money was illegally gotten, then they can simply erase it off their books or remove it off their accounts. And so we're getting back to some measure of stability in international banking by those processes. Now, it takes a while. People want to take a pill to make everything right, but it doesn't happen that way. It takes a lot of effort. I mean, like I say, we did that back in 2012, and here we are 3 years later. See, and so we're seeing the repercussions of those things. And to give people a little bit of confidence, just let me say that things are being corrected. We're going to get things sorted out here, but it might take just a little bit longer than what people would like. But we do have those corrections in place. Certainly with the revaluation of the currencies, we're getting everything onto a fair and equitable level. One of the purposes of the revaluation of the currencies was to tie the currency directly to the gross national product of that particular country, which is fair. In other words, if you go back and look at the history of the central banks, how they manipulated currencies, revaluate them, and they sometimes they would make them look like they're worth a whole lot. The next thing you know, they're not worth anything, and so the central banks were manipulating those things in an effort to simply steal equity out of the country, and that's what they've done. And so if we get the central banks under control of the national treasuries, as we did with the Federal Reserve Bank, then all of a sudden, the real value of a currency can come forth. And so one of the efforts of the revaluation was to tie the value of a country's currency directly to what they're actually producing. If they're not producing anything, the currency is not worth much. If they're really working hard at things, their currency has real value. And that's as it should be. I mean, so that was some of the effects that have come as the effort has been made to correct the financial matrix. And I will say that the individual who has spearheaded this right from the very start is none other than our Saint Germain. Saint Germain is the one who has been pushing to get this financial matrix corrected. And so a lot of the things that we do is being orchestrated by him. So we got somebody from a higher dimension here working with mortals to see if we can't get a few things straightened out, for which I'm eternally thankful, because men simply can't do it. We just don't have it to do without some help from some of the higher dimensions.
Can you give some concrete examples of how these technologies you've used on an international level or on a national level, how they can be used by individuals to empower themselves?
Yes. Perhaps I should start out that discussion by pointing out a difference. We actually have what we would call a bifurcated system. And that is, we have the public side, and then we have the private side. And the private side is where reality is. I mean, that's men, that's women, that's bricks and mortar, that's farms. You see what I mean? Now, on the public side, we deal with other things, which we would call basically the fictional side. Now, on the public side, we have a different form of money than we have on the private side, because on the public side, everything is simply a result of bookkeeping entry ledgers. That is, they simply put numbers on a computer, and that's what it is. But on the private side, that's not the case. On the private side, the money that we create is based upon labor. And that is, whatever form of money it is, whether it's Federal Reserve notes, or whether it's bank checks, or whatever form of currency we're using that has been produced by labor, then it has what we call equity attached to it. So now that's on the private side. And let me express this so that people will understand, is that the public record must conform to the private record. And for instance, as Basel III goes into operation, we're going to go in there and see where that money came from. If the money was illegally gotten, it's out of here. If the money was illegally gotten, as in reality, then that money stays, because again, that money has value to it, whereas all those other numbers on that computer absolutely have no value in the real world. For instance, a friend of mine years and years ago, he went through and did a study. He came up with some numbers, and I can't remember the exact numbers, but let me just give it to you as an example, even though it might not be accurate. He said there's something like 80 trillion of money in the world. He said, but he said there's only 8 trillion things that are available for sale. And so, what are we going to do with that other 72 trillion that's out there floating around? It has no value. And so once you start to connect the money directly to real things, as in we labored for it. So once that money is created, then that money has real value, whereas these other derivatives that are floating around on the planet have absolutely no value, because you can't buy anything with them. I mean, you can have a whole fistful of this money. If there's nothing to buy, what value is the money? It don't have any value. So most of what people call money, they're in these banks and so forth, it has absolutely no value. But again, that's on the public side, which is where it should be. The real money that is created by the labor of people, that's what has the value. Does that kind of help a little bit?
Yes. But how does that apply to us? How can we, what kind of, speaking specifically to some of the classes and workshops you teach, I'd like to know what kind of tools are you providing in this technology that someone like me, for example, could utilize to empower my life in some way, or to remedy the commercial karma that I've accumulated. What are the actual effects that using those technologies would have on my life?
The technologies, let's talk about the public side type technologies, where we're dealing with fictitious money. First of all, the currency that we use is what we call a debt currency. Now, the key to knowledge about debt currencies is the following: that for any debt to be valid, it has to be redeemable. If it's not redeemable in anything, then it has absolutely no value. So, for instance, I gave you the example of the 8 trillion of things that could be bought versus the 80 trillion money floating around. And so my question was, what do we do with that other 72 trillion that has no value? So when you start to talk about the debts that have been created and so forth, then the technology that we have developed here would remove those kind of debts. For instance, for the people that actually went and purchased real estate through a bank and so forth, did any money change hands? And the answer is no. There was no money that changed hands on that purchase. Yet, the banks are charging you exorbitant interest rates on money that they never had. Now, how does that work? And so when we start to go talking about extinguishing mortgages and those kinds of things, there's real value right there. And then other things, for instance, a credit card debt. There is no such thing as credit card debt. That, again, is another fiction that's been created by the banks to help rob the private side money, the money that has equity, away from the people. And so when you go back and start to study how this all came about. When we get back into the period of 1933, and you start to do a real close evaluation of the change in the currency, and as you study House Joint Resolution 192 of the 5th of June 1933, and start to bring it forward into our present time, then you see the value of the technology. Because in essence, the system has been in vogue for so long that, for instance, most of the businesses, most of the institutions, and everything are acting inappropriately. And so, for instance, with credit card debt, I mean, that's some of the easiest stuff to deal with. Mortgages are a bit harder. IRS taxes, as they call them, income tax. That again, that's all a fable. It's an illusion. There is no such liability. There's no such liability is ever created. But if there is a liability, it should be settled on the public side with public money, and then the private people keep their earned money to use as they will. So the value of the technology then to remove the karma of debt is simply we can extinguish those alleged liabilities through some of these technologies. Does that kind of help a little bit?
Yeah. So basically, you're saying that. So you've actually had students who have been able to remove their credit card, mortgage debt, possibly even income tax debt as well?
Correct.
Okay.
Yes, very much so.
And this is what you're teaching in the class at ECETI, or is it beyond that?
Some of that would be brought up. What I'm doing at ECETI, the first part of it would be to demonstrate the history of how we came to our present circumstance. The next session will be a discussion of money, because that's one of the most misunderstood concepts on the planet. I mean, people they don't know what money is, and so I want to spend a session with discussing money, with the public money versus the private money. Give a demonstration of the system of accounting that we use, which is double entry bookkeeping. And then discuss the requirements upon that from GAAP, which is the generally accepted accounting principles, and to demonstrate to them that what they're looking at in the public is purely an illusion. And then the finale for this particular seminar is we're going to go into the assignment of reversionary interest. See what most people don't know. As a result of World War II, to prevent such parties as Henry Ford, I.G. Farben, IBM, AT&T from giving support to the Nazis, the Congress passed what was known as Title 50 of the United States Code Trading with the Enemy Act. And then after the war was over with, some unscrupulous legislature came up with the idea, hey, let's amend Title 50 so that it applies to all of the U.S. citizens. Now, U.S. citizens were created as a result of the Civil War with the 14th Amendment, which causes real problems for people because now all of a sudden people have become fictionalized. And then it finally resulted in the birth certificates and all that kind of junk. But in any event, as a result of that operation with the Trading with the Enemy Act, as it was amended to include all United States citizens, then the people became known as enemies of the state. And then they further went and redefined, like Bush Jr. did. He came up with a new term, which was enemy combatant. And that's his justification for hauling people off to Guantanamo or putting them in all these other secret bases where they're keeping all these political prisoners. And under the guise of being enemy combatants. Now, that's a new term. They don't exist anywhere except they just made it up. But the people who have the status of U.S. citizens are considered to be enemies of the state, And we do have the technology to change that status. And so the status change would be from U.S. citizens to non-resident alien. Now, we're not even talking, there's no way to get back at this point back into being a state citizen, because all the states have done the same thing. They've corporatized. And so you still have that problem. But anyway, if we can get people's status changed from U.S. citizens to non-resident aliens, then they have full access to what they should have had they not been listed as enemies of the state. In other words, using one of these processes, we turn people into what is known as internationally protected person. You see, and then we change the status on the files from U.S. citizen into non-resident alien, which again is a non-taxable position. You see, so these technologies are very, very helpful to people. My only concern with this really is kind of like this. People who have been used to being in a slave mentality, if all of a sudden you open the prison doors and let them out, the next problem is they don't know what to do. And so they would tend to act just like they've always acted as a slave. And it takes just a little bit of time, for people to reconfigure their thought process so they can act like free people instead of slaves. So that's going to be an effort too, to get people re-educated how to act appropriately as free people rather than as slaves. So that's actually a sociological problem, and I'm not a sociologist, but maybe I can have some input into that too.
So, what kind of opportunities does this make available if you follow this process, and what, in your opinion, does a free person act like that a slave does not?
Well, and now we're kind of getting into a philosophical position here, because when we're dealing with real people, you have all varieties. Now, right now, across the planet, not just here in the United States, but across the planet, people are waking up. The only problem is, when they wake up, they're still half asleep, rubbing their eyes, saying, "Oh, we got a new world out here. I wonder what I shall do." And so that's not actually, I'm not in a position to teach people how to be free. I'm just in a position to teach them how to get out of bondage and out of slavery. Perhaps some of these spiritual teachers and some of those in that category would be better suited for that particular job than myself, because I've basically been a kind of a boots on the ground kind of guy, and kind of slugging it out where we had to. And so I'm not really the one to teach those precepts, but we do have a lot of qualified people, probably like yourself, who are in that mode. And so you would be better suited to teach those principles than myself. If I can get to that point, I'm going to retire. Leave it to you guys.
In a concrete sense, if you utilize these technologies and you become a free person, per se, what does that make available? I mean, can you still get a bank account, still function within society?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, but you're not required to pay taxes or anything like that.
Yeah. You would, with your new status, you would go change your bank accounts, reflecting your status. There is a form called a W-8BEN that you would file with the bank to create a new status on your bank account. So that would be a very protective thing on your assets, should you choose to put them into a bank. And I'm not suggesting people have to do that, but in any event, that would certainly change that. Now, in regards to taxes, I mean, I see a lot of stuff come across the internet, that people are going to be given millions of dollars, from this fund or that fund or prosperity programs or all kinds of stuff, and that would be the worst thing to do to people. If everybody in America tomorrow was given $1 million, who'd go to work? Nobody. So the key to prosperity in this country and any other country, if the people are allowed to keep what they earn, then you'll see prosperity. Because at that point, people will have an interest in what they're doing. So many times, myself, when I was in the working community years ago, they would come on and say, "Hey, we need you guys to do overtime." We say, "Why should we?" Because if I do overtime, it's going to raise me into a next tax bracket, and the IRS will get all my money anyway. Why should I work? You see. And so if the people are allowed to keep what they actually earn, that's what will bring prosperity into this country, and not an infusion of a whole lot of money. It doesn't work that way. Sorry to say, but it doesn't work that way. I'm at least that good of a sociologist to make that prediction.
So where's the website that people can sign up for this workshop at ECETI? Do you know the URL for that?
Yeah. If you'll go on to James's website, which is www.eceti, I think it's .com, and look at the coming events, there'll be a way to sign up that way, or they can go to my website, which is www.wssic.com, which stands for Winston Shrout Solutions in Commerce, and the information to sign up for that will be posted there as well. If you have a question or if it's confusing to you, we have a phone number that you can call the office at least Monday through Thursday during normal business hours, and a lady there will answer the phone, answer your questions, and get you started in the right direction. So this is going to be a great event. For those who don't know what ECETI is, it's a interesting place. The proprietor, the owner, a man named James Gilliland, and James has been, for most of his life, a contactee. In other words, he knows them folks out there flying around in spaceships. And they encouraged him. He's had that place for about 30 years now. And they encouraged him to go up there and purchase that property, which he did. And he told me that when he first took over the property, that they would actually land and get out and talk to him, physically. But he said after a time, they requested him to go public. He said after you go public, we'll no longer land. But you can see him flying over all the time. And as it turns out, that particular property, there's a couple of ley lines that intersect there. So it's a huge energy vortex. A lot of people go there just so they can walk around. Like I do. When I go there, I take off my shoes, walk barefooted, through the property and stuff, and it does have an amazing effect. And so that's there. And so it's a privilege to be invited by James to do this seminar on his property. So this aside from the technology I'm going to give out, it's a great experience for people. And a lot of good things can come from it, aside from, listening to me jabber on. So it's a good thing. And I think people will be very well pleased with the effect that it's going to have on them. So yeah, go and do the research and sign up and come on up. We're going to have a good time.
So I want to switch gears for a minute and speak about your Pleiadian friend.
Okay. That's always fun to talk about.
Yeah. So how do you know that this Pleiadian friend of yours is really Pleiadian? If you've never actually seen his biology, what gives you the confidence to believe that he really is who he says he is and not just somebody who's claiming to be that?
Well, through several evidences, I've seen some of the well, for one thing, I've seen his healing technologies that he uses. Also, talking to other people across the planet who he's had an effect upon. And let me express this. He's not the only one like him. As I had mentioned, perhaps, we were sitting in a restaurant one day, and I asked him, are there any others like you on the planet? He said, oh, yeah. I said, there's plenty of us here. I said, really, are there any in this restaurant? He kind of just looked around and said, yeah, there's 3 more in here. And I said, will you point them out to me? He said, no. I won't point them out to you. It's none of your business. And so I have a pretty good idea about what his mission and purpose is here. But of these others who are here, I mean, I don't know what they're doing or what effect they're having, but obviously they are. Now we did have we have a huge infusion of extraterrestrials among us. We have people from inside the Hollow Earth among us, and all these things are going on. And so, in respect to him in particular, the reason that I believe that he's not a human is the things that I've seen him do, actually seen him do, and then some of the references he made. He's offered to show me a lot of stuff, which I have not pursued. But I have every reason to believe that he's exactly who and what he says he is.
Mm-hmm. Can you share some of the things that you've seen that have given you this belief?
Oh, sure. Yeah. One time I went to visit him, and on that occasion he was wearing a short sleeve shirt, and I noticed up and down his arm he had these orange and purple splotches all up and down his arm. And I said, "What in the world is wrong with you?" Oh, he said, "I've got these two melanomas. One on each," and his face was swollen up. He said he had two melanomas right on each temple. And I said, "What did you get into?" Well, he said, "I was probably someplace I shouldn't have been." But he said, "That's okay." He said, "I'll cure it." And so I saw him, a couple of months later after that, and his arm, his skin on his arm looked like baby skin, like it had completely been restored. And so I know what he used. He used some of that monatomic gold, which he keeps in his freezer right there in his garage. He used that all the time. And then on another occasion, a gentleman, a fellow that I knew, was looking for some particular instruments, which I knew that this gentleman had some of, or at least had access to. So I arranged a meeting between this one fellow, and this fellow was actually ex-CIA, very high level in that organization. And so I arranged a meeting, and so we went down to see this Pleiadian. I was calling him Doc. That's why I call him Doc, So we went down to see Doc. And people who hear this story, if I call him Doc, a lot of people know who it is, because he's had an interaction with a lot of people across the well, I can tell you some of those stories. But in any event, so I take this ex-CIA guy down to see him. And when he got there, he immediately recognized him. They knew each other in the Philippines years and years ago. So anyway, I let them transact their business, which had nothing to do with me. I just made the introduction. And so when they had finished their transaction, I got back in and we headed back, north. But he told me this. First off, when I told him originally what Doc's name was, he didn't recognize the name because he was using a different name in the Philippines during those days. And so anyway, he told me this. He said, "I'm going to tell you something." He says, "When I saw him today," he said, "he is 10 years younger than when I knew him in the Philippines 15 years ago. And," he said, "his hair color has changed. He used to have dark hair in the Philippines, but now it's typical redhead." So I have these incidences that even other people bring to my attention, plus what I've seen myself. And there are other things. He has amazing healing capabilities. There are a lot of things that would kill other people. Somebody's trying to kill him all the time. For whatever reason they have, I don't know what the reasons are, but somebody's trying to kill him all the time, and it just don't work. And so if it had been me or you or something like, somebody like us, we'd have been dead a long time ago. But somehow this guy can regenerate. He can heal these cancers, and do all these things. And so yeah, those are some of the evidences that I have that he's not like us.
So what is his mission in being here, and have you ever discussed with him what the global mission of the whole Pleiadian race is in being here?
No, there's no way to address that particular question, because you have to understand that, first off, the Pleiades is a huge place. And he's just one of those who had come here from some place within the Pleiadian system And so he's actually been on this planet through 13 incarnations. So this is his last. But one of the things that he was originally sent here for was the accumulation of gold. And so he has accomplished that. I mean, he once showed me a photograph of his warehouse of gold bars, and it was a huge warehouse. I forgot how many square feet, but it was stacked, three pallets high, nothing but pure gold bars. And he has his own hallmark. So, but I did ask him, what was his overall mission that he was trying to accomplish aside from gold? Now he does other things aside from gold, but I did ask him, what his eventual goal was as far as the work and labor that he does. He said, well, he said, I want to do all these things. He said, because when Jesus comes back, he said, I'm going to turn it all over to him. He said, and then I'm going fishing. so that's pretty much summarizes what his thought process is in regards to all these things that he's done through these 13 incarnations and what he's doing today. So he has that goal. It's kind of a spiritual goal, really, when you think about it.
So when he's referring to Jesus, is he referring to the biblical Jesus or something else?
Oh, correct. He's referring to the biblical Jesus. Now, he is not a member of any church. He is spiritual in the respect that many of us are who are not associated with any particular organization. And does he pray? Yes, I'm sure he does. Does he call upon God? Yes, I'm sure he does. But that was expressed to me as his overall goal. So now, do all the Pleiadians look at things that way? I don't know. But this particular one, that's how he expressed himself.
Who is Jesus in his perspective? Is he some sort of extraterrestrial or just...
Well, yeah. Well, I mean, there's a lot of misconceptions about Jesus, and I keep hearing information coming out all the time about this or that, this or that, or this or that. Apparently, this Jesus character, whoever he is or wherever he came from, and I have my own ideas about that, which I don't need to express, but apparently this planet right here is a very important planet in the total scheme of this universe. And in consequence of that, we have a great deal of effort being made by many of the ascended masters to get this planet into a shape where it can assume that role of being one of the focal points, if I can use that word, of the universe. And many have expressed that same concept themselves. But it appears that this character that's known historically as Jesus is one of those characters that has something to do with the final, if I can use the word, the final redemption of this planet. Remember I said in the beginning that in order for something to be considered a valid debt, it has to be redeemed. And so it appears that this Jesus character, you can call him anything you want to. You can call him Joe or Bill or Mary or Sue for all the difference it makes. And people get all crazy about the name. But more than the name of the individual, what we talk about is what does he actually do? And for whatever plan that was laid out for this planet, he appears to be a key factor in the redemption of this planet. And so, I mean, people have their own ideas, and religions have blown it completely out of scope and so forth. But he does, if he is not one of the ascended masters, he works very closely with them. Because I read years ago, there's a book called Life and Teachings of the Masters of the Far East. Now, those books were created as a result of an archaeological endeavor. Some archaeologists, I think it was around 1920, 25, during that period of time, they had taken off to, they really wanted to do some archaeology work there in the Gobi Desert, because I think they had a pretty good idea what was under the sand. But in any event, in their adventure and their travels and so forth, they did happen upon some of these people in the Himalayas who had risen to the level of ascended master, and they spent considerable time with them. And then in some of their gatherings, Jesus would come, and it's kind of interesting, some of the stories about that. And then I was really interested in the comments that Jesus had made to these people about, some certain things. And so, if you want to call him the Son of God, if you want to call him the Son of David, if you want to call him the descendant of man, whatever you want to call this guy, it does appear that he does have something to do with the final outcome of this planet. So if you look at it that way, I think maybe we can dispel some of these arguments that people keep wanting to make, which for the most part are ridiculous.
So with regard to mind control, can you, because I know you've got some understanding and experience in that area, how do we break through the cognitive dissonance that exists in the mainstream population with regard to the way that reality is, which obviously the conversation I'm having with you today is a whole nother version of reality, but that step, right? So,
okay.
First of all, what sort of mind control has been used that you may be aware of to manipulate the mainstream population to have this belief that they have, and how do you break through that?
Actually, I was trained in mind control. When I went to university, my subject of study was psychology. When I went to college, my interest had to do with basically traditional, like what Freud, Jung, and those different ones were reporting. But when I got there, all of a sudden, the program that they were offering was behavior modification, learning theory, and all those kind of things, which are all elements of mind control. And so I was trained in it. Not that I would use it, but I was trained in that so I can identify it when I see it. And so that's one of the things that's really been helpful to me in my pursuits. Now, if you'll study the history of mind control, I think a lot of it started, as far as the government is concerned, with what happened in the Korean War. And that was some of the servicemen were captured. They were subjected to the mind control techniques that were being in play at that time, which really concerned them. It concerned the U.S. because it appeared that the soldiers or sailors or whomever were not properly trained in how to resist that mind control. And as a result of it, programs were launched to study into it. Probably the main organization that took that up as a job was the CIA. And then, as you realize, the CIA has two facets to it. You have the good guys, and then you have the dark side. And so both sides were exposed to the technology, and the good guys used it for one thing, and then the dark side used it for another. And so they began to experiment with the techniques and so forth that they were starting to see that perhaps the Koreans had used and so forth. And then they went to, because the satanic element in the community had long used mind control techniques in their circumstances, they went to that community looking for technology, and they found it. And in the first instance, they were using the historical, if I can use that word at this point, outdated technologies that were being used by the satanic element, which had to do with splitting personalities. And a good one to study on this for the people who want to look at this situation, there's a fellow called Fritz Springmeier. I think you know that name. Yeah, Fritz had done a great deal of research into that particular area of it and exposed a great deal. Of course, they threw him in jail for it, but he's out now. But in any event, Fritz had exposed a lot of those early techniques and technologies. And then, because they were basically using physical torture to create these multiple personalities and such as that. And then they learned that then they tried to use chemicals. And that was one of the reasons why the CIA first started to experiment with LSD. Now, I do have some firsthand, I shouldn't say firsthand, secondhand knowledge about that. My mother, she was a registered nurse, and she worked at the state hospital, where they had the people who had mental problems. And so the CIA did, in fact, come into that hospital and start using LSD and different things on those mental patients as guinea pigs. She told me with her own eyes, she saw, in a typical hospital, they have metal doors, because of, fire and all those kind of things. And in that metal door, there's that small window with the wires in it and all that kind of stuff. She told me, and my mother never lied about anything. I never heard her tell a lie in her whole life. She told me that she actually witnessed a full-grown man who was hopped up on LSD from the CIA, dove through that window and came out the other side completely unscratched. And she was scratching her head saying, wonder how that happened. But aside from going into an altered state, apparently there was something that had happened to this man physically, because he dove through a window that was much smaller than his body was and went through that glass, come out on the other side without a cut on it. Now, my mother don't lie. She's dead now. She didn't lie in those days. I know she wasn't lying. So we see all that crazy stuff going on. And then, so the CIA experimented with chemicals to create the same effect that they have been using torture for. And then eventually, once they got past the chemical, then they went into electronic. And that's where we're at today, really. If you look around at, for instance, all the cell towers, what are those cell towers? Are they simply for transmission of voice over cell phones, or is there something else going on? Well, there is something else going on. And so now at this point, the technology has been developed that they can electronically use those devices for mind control. For instance, I read an article one time by a fellow. He actually worked for a company that were developing electronic devices that would that could be used, for mind control. So he was very experienced in that area, and he went to a seminar put on by another company who demonstrated some of their technology. And this guy reported, even though I knew this was being done to me, he said I could not resist it. With all the knowledge he had, he could not resist what was happening to him. And so people hear voices in their head. People get chips put in their bodies, and some of them put into the base of the spine, and so forth. And so when somebody says, I'm hearing voices in my head, they are. So we followed up over the years with all the techniques and technology that were happening. And then also there was an electronic grid up in space. I can't remember how far up it was, because it's not there anymore. Anyway, this electronic grid somehow was created to control the population through mind control. But in that respect, speaking to James Gilliland, he said he used to be able to look up and see that, but he said when he looks up now, he said it's gone. Now who removed it? I don't know. Hopefully it's some of our friendly ETs or whoever. But that mind control grid is gone, but the residual effect on the people is not gone. And so when you start talking about cognitive dissonance and all these kind of things that people suffer with, then we have to overcome that. And so apparently the electronic grid is gone, but yet the residual effect upon people is not gone. And so we have to teach, we have to motivate, we have to expose people to truth. We have to get them into a more spiritual position so they can start to act differently, because they have been conditioned. I mean, this is all Pavlovian now. They have been conditioned to act in a certain way, and they don't know anything else. And so sometimes it's very hard to break through that, but hopefully with all the positive energy which is being infused into the planet, people will be benefited by that, and so they can come out from under their normal practices that was caused by the Pavlovian system, which is stimulus response. And so maybe they can see their way through that now and start to come out from under that mind control. So the opportunity to come out from it now is greatly enhanced. And so we simply have to reach to the people and explain to them, here's what happened to you. And here's how you can get away from that. And so, spirit, I'm not a spiritual teacher. You're a spiritual teacher. We have many people across the planet and country who are very good at that. I'm not good at it. I'm kind of a, take a ball bat and hit somebody in the head if they don't pay attention kind of guy. But some of you others who have developed that ability, then it's your job. I'm doing my job. You guys got to do your job. Hate to put you on the spot, but that's the way it is.
So when a child is born, a bond is issued in their name, and their name is represented in all uppercase letters as a corporate version of themselves. And so what happens when a person changes their name, whether by marriage or just by choice? What happens to that original bond and the original name and the transition to the new one? What is that process exactly?
Okay, let me explain that whole system. It's not quite that simple. So let me explain the whole program, and then you can kind of fit what you just said. You can fit it into that. When a child is born in a hospital, which again is a government hospital, all the hospitals are government hospitals. I don't care what they say on the front door. Now, so when a baby is born, they are delivered into the hands of a state official. That state official is a licensed, a licensed physician. All right. That licensed physician has a duty based upon his license to do certain things. So when the baby is delivered, and it takes the breath of life. In other words, it's alive. They don't do this with stillborns. Okay, so this is only a live birth. What they do is they have the mother fill out an application for a live birth. Now, I sometimes use the example of how do you spell that word? And that is, we typically would spell it B-I-R-T-H, but it could just as well be spelled B-E-R-T-H, which would indicate that a birth, again, is something that a vessel gets safe harbor in. So when you get a berth for your motorboat or whatever, or your sailing ship, what you're doing, you're putting it into a dock, so that it has protection, while you're not there, so the storms don't ravage it or whatever. All right. So that application for a live birth is in fact the registry into the commercial registry for that vessel. That's why I called it B-E-R-T-H. Now, that creates a particular trust situation. Let me express why that is, and that is because anytime there is risk involved, if the outcome is uncertain, then a trust is automatically created. For instance, when a baby is born, how long is it going to live? A day, a week, or whatever. We don't know. Maybe live to be 100 years old. We don't know. But because risk is involved, then a trust situation is automatically created. Now, the type of trust, and there are many types of trust. Anyway, the type of trust that's created with that birth and the recordation and registration and so forth is referred to as a foreign situs trust. That's what it's called. All right. Now, that application goes through the commercial system to the Department of Commerce, and then they send that to a private company. And that private company is known as the Depository Trust Company. It's located at 55 Water Street, New York, New York. So we know where it's at. I mean, it's no big deal. And they also have offices in every country on the whole planet. So they're everywhere. Because what happens is those original documents which were created that created that foreign situs trust, this private company creates private bonds to guarantee the debt, any debt instrument that's produced, by that entity. They have the bonds to guarantee that debt. That's what they're for. Now, for those who have studied negotiable instruments, you understand that a bond is not a negotiable instrument, but it's an insurance policy for a negotiable instrument, in particular for a promissory note. All right. So the debt of that baby for his whole life is actually guaranteed by these bonds. And there are actually 10 bonds that are created in the amount of 3.5 billion per bond for a total of 35 billion. And I seriously doubt if anybody is going to go into debt for $35 billion, but it's there. Okay. So those are the guarantees for the debt. So that's the insurance policy. And just by the by, any other insurance policy is not really an insurance policy. It's simply a reinsurance. Now, probably in the world you came from, you understand reinsurance. So these the automobile insurance, life insurance, medical insurance, all that stuff. That's always actually reinsurance, because that birth has already been guaranteed by the DTC through the processes that they've done. Now, one of the things that I had left out in my description of this process here is that, and this is the concept that many people have a hard time with. But anyway, it is this, and that is the registration into the commercial registry creates an exemption from taxation. And so in this status of this new baby, it is tax exempt. It cannot be taxed. And this goes right along with the concept that was expressed in the Declaration of Independence about inalienable or inalienable rights, that you can't tax a right. And so this baby has rights which are tax exempt. And that exemption was created by the registration into the public registry. Now, like I tell people, I said, your exemption number is on the back of your Social Security card. We don't need to get into all that because there have been a lot of misconceptions about that. But in any event, based on that whole operation there was something that they referred to as a long form birth certificate. Long form birth certificate, or in some instances, the document actually says certificate of live birth. All right. So that's that first system. And if we had totally operated within that system, life would be a whole lot different for us. But we were induced to give up that position on this basis. And I'll just use myself as an example. As a 15-year-old, I decided I wanted a job because I needed some money. My parents weren't rich, and if I wanted to have money to go out and, chase the girls or whatever, I had to have my own jingle. So I went down, and tried to get a part-time job after school, all that kind of stuff. And so their position was, well, we'll give you the job, but you have to have a Social Security number in order to work here. So I said, cool. I mean, where do I get that at? They said, go down here at the Social Security office and make an application, and they'll give you one. And so I said, great. So I went on down, signed the standard Social Security Form 5. Now, what I did not know at that time was I was, in essence, signing away my rights that were established under the Foreign Situs Trust. Because this new system, this new trust that I got involved in is a different kind of trust. It's referred to as a Sestake Vi trust, which is totally different than that Foreign Situs Trust. So in essence, I had subrogated my rights on the original trust into this new Sestake Vi trust by my signature on this application for a Social Security account. Now, let's back up just a little bit. Aside from that certificate of live birth, or what we call the long form birth certificate, there was also created by the state another, which we call the short form birth certificate in most places. Some places they call it something different. But anyway, the state created another birth certificate whereas my name was spelled in all capital letters. Okay? And sometimes I refer to that certificate as a death certificate on the basis, if you go out to the cemetery, you'll find that all the names on the tombstones are written that same way. So you can look at that birth certificate as a death certificate because it is the first presumption of death. And if you'll go and look at the attitude or the way that the IRS describes people, they'll always describe them as being deceased or decedent. And so that's how the IRS gets their hooks in there, because we're dead. And so technically everything in the country is under probate law. So your estate has to be probated. And boy, do they do a good job of that. In any event, once that birth certificate, that short birth certificate is created, then when you activate it with the signature on the SS5 form, now this new Sestike Vi Trust goes into operation, and you're because of your signature, then you are construed to be the trustee on this Sestike Vi, when in actuality you should be the beneficiary. But because people are fed a line of baloney, then they believe what's been told to them under mind control. So in consequence of that, we have to educate them on that issue. Now, what we're doing with the technology, certainly the technology that we're going to present this coming seminar at the ESETI, is we're going to deal with both of those circumstances. We're going to deal with both the short form birth certificate / death certificate, and we're also going to deal with the long form birth certificate. And the purpose of which, again, is to tie up and to remove the commercial karma that exists both in the public and in the private. So we have to deal with both sides of the equation, to get a full package on what we're doing. So does that kind of help a little bit, or do you have any questions?
Yeah, that does. So what happens to this trust if somebody gets married and changes their name, or they just change their name out of just a decision to do so?
Okay, so let's talk about a typical civil marriage. All right. When people want to get involved in a civil marriage, I'm not talking about common law marriage or other things. I'm talking about a civil marriage because it involves a contract. Now, when somebody wants to get into a civil contract of marriage, they go to the agency, whatever it's called, where you're at, and you make an application for the license. The application is not the license. People get confused about that. It's the application that would cause the state to issue a license if they choose to, and they may not. I mean, if you go and try to get into a civil marriage, get a license and all that kind of stuff, don't you have to submit to a blood test and physicals? So the state is not required to issue a license based solely on your application. There are certain qualifications that you must meet in order to get that license. So it's the application is where it all starts. And so based on that, they may issue a license. Now, people need to really go and study that word license because the definition of a license is, now listen to this, permission from the state to do something that is otherwise unlawful, illegal, or immoral. Okay, so that's what a license is. It's a marriage license, it's a driver's license, it's a dog license, they got licenses, millions of them. Okay, all right, but a license, again, is permission from the state to do a thing, okay? So you go down to the licensing bureau for a civil marriage, you fill out the forms, which is nothing more than an application, and the application is so the state will grant you a benefit privilege. Okay, now people really need to study the difference between a benefit privilege and a right, because they're on complete ends of the spectrum. All right, a right cannot be taxed, but a benefit privilege is always taxed. And so when you fill out the application for that benefit privilege, just figure there's going to be a tax included with it. Now, in the case of a civil marriage, the license, which I had mentioned, is permission from the state to do something unlawful, illegal, or immoral. When people take out that license, the term that's used to describe what they're doing in that marriage is called sexual commerce. Are you getting me now? Sexual commerce. That's the word. Now, the issue of that benefit privilege, the issue of that license now automatically has a lien upon it from the state. People don't understand that a marriage contract is a three-party contract: husband, wife, and the state. Now, this is one of the things, that is kind of throwing me for a loop. It's too bad that these what's called same-sex marriages don't understand this, because when I kept hearing, we need to get marriage license, all kinds of, I said, oh, what are you thinking? You're playing right into the state's hands. Prior to that time, your associations and so forth were not regulated by the state, and now all of a sudden you're getting the state into a three-party contract. Duh. I mean, why in the world would you want to do that? Anyway, for lack of education, lack of understanding, then that political position has been pushed, which in my mind has not helped out that community. It's set them back. And so if you're listening to me out there, reconsider that. Reconsider that, because you're playing right into the hands of the state. Now they have control where they didn't have control before. So, okay, now I'm being political, so I'll stop that. But in any event, the state claims ownership of the issue from that contract, which is the children in most cases. They're claiming ownership of that issue. And so you can see the complications that you're running into with a civil marriage, civil contract for marriage, because it's that third party that causes you all the problems. I mean, they stick their nose into everything you're doing. And if they want to, they can come and get their property, which is the children. See? So we've developed technologies even to deal with that. Certainly some of this technology we're going to demonstrate up here at East City will satisfy that problem, because, for instance, it's been about, 4 or 5 months ago, there was three of the three of the native chiefs who were doing some international contracting, and they came to me on the basis that I'm an international notary. Okay, so they thought that if I notarized their contracts, perhaps it would have a greater impact on whatever it was they were trying to do. And I'm not really quite sure what they were trying to do in my business, but I was willing to notarize their signatures on these international contracts. Okay, so one of the chiefs was the chief of the Lakota Sioux, and he just by chance, his wife came with him. So while these other chiefs were out here talking about all the stuff they were trying to do, I had a chance to visit with her. We got to talking about circumstances, and she pointed out to me that the government was in the habit of coming and taking the children off the reservation and taking them to God only knows where, indicating to me that over the years there have been something like 26,000 children taken from their families, from their homes, off the reservation and put into either foster care or adopted out into white. She didn't know where they all went. Nobody could trace them. All right. So I said, well, you know what? I said, I think I have something to put a stop to that. So then I explained to her this authentication process that we're going to present. And I said, if you will institute this among the people, I said, number one, you can stop the kidnapping of your children. And I said, you might be able to go back and get some of those others back, if you have just a little bit of legal savvy. And so she said, well, good. So I showed her that process. And so she was off back to the reservation to start that process among the people. And so the benefits of some of this technology that we have, does have deep implications that could be used to solve some of these problems, like with the native people or with anybody. I mean, ever so often I get a call from somebody, said, hey, social services or what do they call it? Child services just come and got my child. What can I do about it? You see. And so this is not only with the native people, this is also with everybody in the country. And so they do this. And of instances, when these children are taken, they're taken into situations which are serious pedophilia situations. My God, we got to put a stop to that. I mean, we can't have that going on here in the planet. Look what it does to the people. Look what it does to the morality of our society. And so can we put a stop to it? And I say, yes, I believe that I have at least one technology that would be very helpful in that respect. So we're not just talking about money here. We're talking about other circumstances that have far-reaching implications.
Now, so if I get called into court, for example, or let's say someone gets called into court, and the judge asks you your name, so since you're the trustee of the estate, what is your legal obligation in that case? Can you say you're the trustee of the estate of so-and-so, or do you have to acknowledge your name?
What I always tell people, if you go to court, put a name tag on with your name spelled properly. And when they ask you for your name, point to your name tag and say, can you see it from where you're at, or shall I move closer? Or if you have to, spell it out for them. Now, I learned this from a judge. One time I was in a court and the judge asked me for my name. I said, well, what's your name? He knew better to give me his name because he knew what I'd do with it, because he knew that I would be contracting with him. So what he did when I asked him for his name, he just pointed to his name tag on his desk. And I said, aha, the guy just told me something. So I encourage people to do that very same thing. Put a name tag on. And then when they ask for your name, just point to it. Just like that judge did, you see.
So essentially, if he were to give you his name, you would have jurisdiction in that court, right?
I'd have jurisdiction over him.
Right, over him, yes.
You cannot get a judge to say their name. And there's a good reason for it. They're trained that way. They know better to do it. Why do you think they ask you for your name? Because they want to have control of you. So if you give them your name, now they own your name. And they can do with it whatever they want. But aside from that point, you have brought up the concept of being trustee for that all capital letter name, and we can change that. We do change it. One of the techniques that we've used for ever and a day is what's called appointment of fiduciary. Again, the people would be well served to study trust, a little bit about trust law, because on that Social Security trust that was created by the signature on the SS5 form, because we're the only ones who contributed into that account, that makes us the settlor. And the law of the trust is this. The express intent of the settlor is the law of the trust. And so it's the settlor that gets determined who the officers are in that trust. And so we've taken to appointing attorneys as the trustee for that trust. And boy, does that ever work good, man. For instance, I was helping a guy with a federal case years ago. Well, probably way back in, I don't know, maybe 2002, 2003. I think it's 2003 period of time. And he had this crazy federal case going on. And he said that he had a court-appointed attorney, a public defender. And I said, you got to fire that guy. I said, it's going to cause you nothing but trouble. So he tried 3 times to fire that attorney, and he wouldn't go away. I said, okay. So we put in the paperwork to appoint that guy as the fiduciary for the defendant. He went straight to the judge and tried to beg off that case because he knew what was coming. He knew what was coming. Because what people don't understand is that the courts are set up basically in regards to, again, we're in the admiralty now, so we're talking about contracts. And so as the trustee, for that defendant, then the attorney now has the responsibility to settle and close all liabilities in regards to that trust. And if he doesn't, guess who's going to jail? The attorney is. And that's why that guy went and tried to beg off that case from that judge, mean, we tried to fire him 3 times and he wouldn't go. And then all of a sudden he's begging the judge, can he get off of it? So that attorney knew what was coming. And then we was able to settle it out a little bit more amicably, if I can use that word. But the appointment of fiduciary, very, very powerful. And I'll tell you another quick story if you want to hear it, if you got time to hear this other story. So anyway, this story went like this. A lady in Canada, she had, for whatever her reason was, she had married an attorney. Oh boy, what's wrong? What was she thinking? So anyway, they had a little bit of a dispute, and so they decided to split up. And so this attorney, he simply took everything she had that she had brought. I mean, it was down to the point he even took her heart, you know, and he was basically stripping her bare of everything just because he was an attorney and he could do it, as he thought, which got her riled up. And so she started yelling and screaming at him. He had the police come and arrest her for assault. People don't understand that assault is different than battery. So she didn't hit him, so it wasn't battery, but it was assault. So he had the police come and arrest her on assault. So now she's facing the criminal indictment for assault. All right. So they threw her in jail. She bailed out. And she was trying to fight this thing. And then finally she called me. I said, well, cool. I said, I think we can handle this pretty good. So anyway, I said, do this. I said, there's 2 documents. I said, take a copy of the indictment. And I said, you write the acceptance for value language on that indictment. Now, a lot of people listen to this don't understand acceptance for value technology, and we don't have time to go over all that. If you go to my website, we have single topic DVDs on acceptance for value itself. So we don't have time right now to discuss why we would do that. But anyway, I said, take the indictment. I said, do all your acceptance for value language on that. I said, then create an invoice for all this property that's been stolen from you, all the time you spent in jail, all the trouble you had to go to come down to the court. And I said, make it look good. So she did. She created an invoice with a ledger that amounted to about $3 million. I said, okay. And then she had a notary certify it. So now we got a certified invoice, which is even better yet. I said, okay. Now I said, next time you go down to the court, I said, don't be ignorant about it. Just wait for your turn to talk. I said, but when it gets to be your turn to talk, I said, you stand up and tell the judge the following. Let's call her Jane Doe, okay? So that's how it would appear on the indictment. It'd be Jane Doe in all capital letters. I said, when it gets to be your turn to talk, I said, you stand up and you tell the judge that, number one, that you are the settler for Jane Doe. Because she was the only party that made any contributions into that account, into that trust. So she had to be the settler by definition. So I said, you stand up and you tell the judge you're the settler for Jane Doe, and that you're nominating the judge as the trustee for Jane Doe. Now, what a lot of people don't know is that, first off, the judge was an attorney, and an attorney cannot resist appointment of fiduciary or appointment of trustee. They can't do it. So the settler stands up and says, hey, I'm appointing you. I'm nominating you as the trustee for Jane Doe. And aside from that, I am also, aside from being the settler, I am also the beneficiary for Jane Doe. Now, I said, now, as the beneficiary, you can make demands upon the trustee. So I said, at that point, hand over that accepted for value indictment, hand over that certified invoice, and then tell the trustee, get it paid. Because now the trustee has responsibility to settle any liability against the trust. What do you think happened? Things come to a screeching halt. They called a recess. The judge and all that people left out of the courtroom, and that's the last time they ever had a hearing on that case. So then she asked me, what should I do about that invoice? I said, okay, we'll go do this. I said, do just like the IRS does. I said, give them a 30, a 60, and a 90-day notice, because on 90 plus 1 days, that invoice turns into an account receivable, which is in fact a security. And she worked in that world, and she knew exactly what a security was. So anyway, last I heard, she was trying to chase down the attorney general up there in British Columbia to get her money. I don't know if she ever did, but by golly, that court case came to an end, and nobody's going to screw with her after that. So the appointment of fiduciary technology we've used for a very long time, quite successfully in many instances. So yeah, we have solutions to a lot of these problems.
Mm. So if you're able to fulfill your own mission in all the work that you're doing with individuals and with larger organizations around the world, what kind of a future do you envision for us? I mean, are you hopeful that we're heading in the right direction? And what do you actually see as far as what's our societal structure look like? What are people's lives going to be like in this future that you are creating?
It's very, very bright. And I'll tell you, well, I won't tell you what I can't prove, but I will tell you what I suspect, if that's acceptable. I suspect that we already have in place a new form of government. People go back, if you go back to the Civil War and realize as a result of that war, the whole country has been under military occupation ever since. The municipalities, the civil government, and so forth are actually under the control of the military. If you don't believe me, go out to any military base, talk to the provost marshal, and ask them, "Hey, do you guys control the country?" And they say, "Yeah, we do." Okay, even the enlisted people know it. All right. So as a result of that, if in fact the civil government fails, then it's the duty of the military to fix the problem, and they have fixed the problem. Now, like I say, I can't prove this, but all indications to me are that the military has put in an interim republic form of government who are now in control of Washington, D.C. And, my people who know these things are telling me that's the case. And the only thing that has stopped them from making the public announcement so far was the introduction of the new currency. So the new currency, I think they'll probably call, I haven't seen it, but the new currency will be issued by the Treasury, not by the Federal Reserve banks, as the FRNs are. And so the Treasury is going to introduce a currency. Their only holdup was they could not comply with the Basel III agreements, which requires that a currency has to have substance backing in order to be traded internationally. Okay, so in order to accomplish that, the U.S. Treasury had to create a national currency. Prior to that time, we just used Federal Reserve notes, which is international currency. We are the only country that has not had a national currency. Now, you know that President Kennedy, with the assistance of President Sukarno of the Sukarno Trust, are we listening now? Anyway, President Kennedy tried to introduce a national currency for which he got a bullet to the head, or maybe 2 or 3 bullets to the head. President Sukarno got in a lot of trouble himself over that because of the powers that be at that time. At our present situation, though, because of the work that's been done by some of these characters in the international, now we have a change, and now we have an opportunity to actually facilitate the bringing forth of a national currency on this basis. And that basis is that the Chinese elders have given to the United States. Now, the gold didn't move. It came, of course, in the form of gold bonds. But the Chinese elders have, in fact, transferred 100 billion in gold to the U.S. Treasury. Now, I know, the Chinese ain't stupid. They're smart people. And I know that they would not have transferred that gold to the United States Treasury if the bad guys were still in control. I mean, why would they transfer that gold if it was going to be stolen right out the front door the next day? So that's a strong indication that in fact the new military interim government is in fact in charge. Now that they have the substance backing for the new currency, we're just waiting for the introduction of it. And I strongly suspect, again, I don't have knowledge of this, I strongly suspect that that currency will probably be announced for use at the fall equinox. They always seem to want to do everything according to some kind of, event like that. And so I suspect, I could be wrong. I suspect they'll probably introduce a new currency at the fall equinox. As I understand it, the Federal Reserve notes that the people have, or what we call the U.S. dollar, will be exchanged at par. With a surcharge, for the bank, maybe 2%, maybe 3%, but nothing more than that. Well, if you go down and if you're going to Europe, you go down to the bank or whoever, and you exchange, some of your Federal Reserve notes for foreign currency, they always charge you for it, which is only fair. I mean, it's just business. So I suspect that probably there will be some kind of a small percentage that will be charged for the transfer from Federal Reserve notes into this new currency. That's fair. I got no problem with that. But at that measure, I mean, when that happens, holy cow, now we got it locked in, man. It ain't going back from that. And as I understand it, the United States Incorporated is presently in receivership to the Swiss. Now, the United States Incorporated, people don't know it, but the United States Incorporated is, in fact, a maritime corporation registered in Puerto Rico. And they have been doing business here in the United States of America, basically as a debt servicer for the Federal Reserve banks. But now we got the Federal Reserve banks under control. We get the currency changed around and so forth. The U.S. Incorporated, they can go back to Puerto Rico for all I care. And they can do whatever they want to do down there, but we'll have a new republic. This interim government is in place to restore republic government to the United States of America, because that's the duty of the military. And I believe that they're doing their job. And when this happens, we should all support and not go crazy over this thing, think it's some kind of military coup or something like, because it's not. It's not a military coup. It's a correction. And so their job is to get things set straight, and then at some point in the near future to hold constitutional elections to restore the republic and to fill the offices necessary to carry on a normal government. Now, this is going to be an interesting thing on this basis. For those who are aware of the original 13th Amendment, I'm not talking about the ones that's on the books now. I'm talking about the original 13th Amendment. In essence, banned all attorneys. If you go look at our Congress today, our offices and the things that people do, the bulk of them are attorneys. So when this new republic comes in for elections, those who are attorneys who will not renounce their bar association, they will be disqualified from being elected. So we're going to see some interesting changes here come up pretty quick, and all for the better, I might add. So what does Winston predict? Prosperity. Because when the Federal Reserve notes go out the window and we have our own national currency, which is not an interest-bearing currency, the IRS is out of here. The IRS, their specific job is to collect the interest on the Federal Reserve notes. If we have no more Federal Reserve notes, there's nothing for the IRS to do. And from reports I'm getting, they're already starting to shut down a lot of their offices across the country. So again, back to my original hypothesis, which is if people are allowed to keep what they earn, then we'll have prosperity. And so it's not about, millions of dollars coming into the hands of the people. It's about, hey, get up and go to work. Let's produce something. And so that kind of stimulation will, in fact, bring prosperity to the country. And that's the only way I can possibly see it happening.
Sounds like a very hopeful future and not that far off. So that's going to be very exciting to observe happening in months ahead.
Oh, yeah. I can't believe it's taken them this long.
Yeah. So you mentioned your website and everything earlier on. So a lot of these programs that you talked about, a lot of this technology, it's available on DVD as well. So even if people can't make it to some of your seminars, they can buy them on your website, right?
That's correct.
Okay. And what's the website again?
It's www.wssic.com, which stands for Winston Shrout Solutions in Commerce. If you just type my name into a Google search, aside from all the bad things that are said about me, my website will come up.
Okay, fantastic. Well, thank you so much for taking time to speak with me again, and I'm looking forward to meeting up in person. Maybe we'll even come out to one of your seminars or have you out here in Michigan to do a workshop next year.
Great. Yeah, we can do that. Like I say, I come, I just travel all the time. People ask me, where do I live? And I point to my suitcase. I never unpack my suitcase. I just take the clothes out, wash and put them back in. So anyway, but it's a good effort. During my time doing this, I have met just the most remarkable people. I mean, it just brings joy to my heart. The associations and people that I have the opportunity to meet. We got some excellent, good-hearted people who are working on these things. Just the top quality of people you can find on the planet. So it's been my privilege to do these things just because of what I've gotten from it.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you again, and we'll speak real soon.
Okie dokie.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of Wake and Empower TV. Join me next week as I speak with another incredible individual who is standing on the leading edge and changing the world.